3 Steps to Becoming an Externally Focused Church, this week on the Church Revitalization Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malphurs Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and AJ Matthew.
Welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast. My name is Scott Ball. I'm joined by my friend and co-host, AJ Matthew.
Here I am.
All right. So, talking about revitalization through outreach. We've done a handful of episodes on outreach from time to time over the course of the podcast, the life of this podcast. Over the course of 280 episodes, we've touched on this topic.
It's come up probably not often enough, actually.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And I think maybe one of the things that's worth mentioning here is how consistently when we're going through the strategic envisioning process, especially as we kind of get to that part of the discipleship pathway exercises and we start evaluating our outreach strategies, very often it isn't that churches aren't doing outreach. They've got outreach activity, but they don't really have an outreach strategy. They don't really have a plan. So they got stuff they do. They have partnerships maybe with community organizations, or they have events that they do every year, but it may or may not be cohesive. It may or may not be building towards something. It may or may not be clear to the average person in the church how exactly they're supposed to engage in outreach. Outreach feels scary to people. Evangelism sounds like not something I want to do, to the typical churchgoer. So for all of these reasons, outreach is difficult and can be a hurdle for churches, but it really is the linchpin. It's the key to revitalization. So we're going to talk about that today on the podcast.
I think in my experience, the smaller the church has grown, the less the external focus is. Sometimes that, is driven by the decreasing number of people that, can even pull something off at some kind of event or outreach. Money, as the church gets, I'm talking very small, you're down to less than 50 people. And an aging congregation, outreach becomes less and less. And maybe the things that you feel like are outreach just aren't really geared. They're not really designed to have excellent outcomes that you would maybe hope for. So, I think you're right. Sometimes there are things happening, but there's not a lot of intentionality or strategy around it, not good communication about it, not good training around it. And then it kind of goes down from there to the point that it's sometimes not even existing anymore. It's a very important topic, and it is absolutely key. If your church is plateaued or declining, this needs to be one of the key elements that's focused on. And as we jump into our first step of the 3, Scott, this is where we'll drive that point home, and that's changing that mindset from us to them. This goes right to the heart. This is step 1. This goes right to the heart of the Great Commission. So churches that have, just gotten away from that, they've gone, a few weeks ago we did the Comfort Commission versus the Great Commission. And that's internally focused. Just, are we happy with us? And not really thinking about the world outside. But this is the primary mindset shift that has to happen for churches to get back on a growth trajectory, because growth is about enlarging the kingdom of God and bringing the gospel to people that need to hear it, engaging them then in discipleship. So, the church has got to reach a point of deciding we haven't been doing this right. We want a course correction, and then beginning to build that back into the people, rebuilding the culture of the church to care for one another, but to focus our work and our attention on the people outside.
Yeah, I think what happens is I think the most common thing, it's just very rare for me to encounter a church. It's a non-zero number of churches that I've worked with where they have nothing that they're doing for outreach. I have worked with a few where that was the case, but that's not the usual case. The usual case is that they are doing things for outreach. They have outreach programs, they have partnerships, they have events that they do. But the problem is, as it relates to this first step of we need to change our mindset from focusing on us to focusing on them, is maybe even phrasing it this way, that they are us is how we need to really shift it. Because when you're focusing on them as I kind of hate this language, but as an other or as a group, then it's almost it's like charity work that you're doing. We're going and we're just doing this for them. And then there's the real work. There's the real church that's just us inside. And then we deign to leave our we open up the gates, like Willy Wonka. We allow the riffraff to come in for this one event a year, but in reality, we're trying to get these, get it. Okay, it's done now. I feel dirty. We let them in. And there's a little bit of that if we're being entirely honest. And if you think about the kinds of things that churches often want to do, it's stuff where they want to. It sounds good for us to do it, but you don't really want those people to show up at your church on a Sunday. Let's go. I worked with a church once in an unnamed city. I won't say where it was. In an unnamed city, in a suburb of a major urban area. And one of their outreach things was that they would once a month go into said urban area and work with the homeless there. And that, I'm not saying that wasn't important work. I mean, it's good to serve the homeless, but it was a kind of thing that they could tell themselves were doing outreach without any risk of those people actually showing up at their church on a Sunday morning. And so that's the mindset shift that I'm talking about, is rather than seeing them as a whole different category of person, beginning to develop a heart for them to become us. That's the mindset shift. We want to, the borders of us has to expand to include them.
Yeah.
And that's the mindset shift that's missing in declining churches.
I mean, let me clarify. I mean, I don't think you're not suggesting that everything that you do has to result in people then coming to your church, because there's a lot of things that could be done outside that. For instance, that example you just gave, I mean, if they were coming alongside an urban church right there in that neighborhood that was underfunded and resourced, it could help them and make sure those people get connected to that church and are being discipled.
Sure.
But not doing the fly in, fly out, kind of virtue signaling.
Yeah. I mean, but that's my experience with a lot of declining and plateaued churches, is the kind of outreach work they do is the kind that makes them feel the best, but has the least risk of someone actually showing up at their church. Because
you got to check your heart on that for sure. Yeah.
It's like, oh, we go and we serve at the soup kitchen. Yeah, but you don't want those people at your church. Like,
yeah.
For the most part.
Yeah.
It's something that you're doing that makes you feel good, but it's not. It's, you don't have to build a relationship with those people on an every week basis.
Yeah.
You see them once a month when you swoop in. And that, again, that doesn't mean that's valuable work. Like, that's good. But if you can continue to do that and do the things that reach your neighbors, great. But if we're doing that so that we don't have to actually reach our neighbors, that's where the problem is.
Well, we've both worked with churches in locations in which, they're maybe really close to a neighborhood, in the middle of a neighborhood. There's plenty of people nearby. And you're like, what are you doing here locally? And the answer is nothing.
Nothing.
We don't know. We don't know who lives there. I mean, this was something that, I remember, years ago when you and I were still new to the Malfers Group, and Aubrey, was still engaged and training us up and everything. We used to grab like satellite views, show the team, like, here's your church. Look at these rooftops. Do we know who lives in any of these? And I don't remember ever being at a church where like, oh yeah, we know our neighborhood well. That's who we're really reaching. Everybody was always like, no, we don't know. Literally across the street from our church. We don't have any idea who lives there.
Yeah.
So,
Well, this is timely, depending on when you're listening to this. This has been in the news lately. I'm not going to make a political point here, but there's this concept of ordo amoris, like the order of people that you have an obligation to. So we have an obligation to love and serve all people. Like I think that's maybe a misunderstanding, actually, in this political environment. Some people say we should only care about these people, or we should only care about these people, and that's not rightly understood. We have an obligation to love and care for all people. But there is an order of obligation that you have. Your first order of obligation is to your family. What good is it for me to love some person in some other country if I don't love my wife and my kids first and take care of them first? I have my first obligation, my first duty is to them. Your next layer of that would be to that immediate community that you have. What good is it for me to love, some people in some other neighborhood? If I don't love the people in my community first, and then to your nation and then to the world. Like there is an order. You do have an order of obligation. It's a little bit like the example that gets used. I think this is a good one. Although maybe a bit drastic. It's a colorful analogy. If there are two kids drowning in a pool, and one of them is your kid, and another one is a stranger's kid, and you can only save one kid, which one are you going to save? You would likely save your own kid first because you have an obligation to that child more than to the other child. That doesn't mean if you could save both kids, you'd save both, but you would of course you would dive in to save your own child first because it's your kid. And what I see sometimes, AJ, and this is maybe just a shift to this next point, which is why we need to discover and understand our community's needs, is I see churches that do seem to care more about global missions, about the person who's in Africa or Costa Rica or Nicaragua, more than they care about the person who's 2 blocks from them.
yeah.
They know the names of people who live in Nicaragua, but they can't name a person who lives 2 blocks away. And it's disordered, actually. You should care. I'm not saying you can't care about both. You should care about both. But to care about one at the exclusion of the other is a problem. And it is a hallmark of declining churches, is that you see more of this.
Yeah.
And it's a problem.
Well, I always think about the parable of the Good Samaritan, because it begs the question, who is my neighbor? Who, Jesus, am I supposed to apply this truth to that you're explaining to me? And the answer is contextual. I mean, the one that you have the most direct contact with, who do you have the most opportunity to influence with the gospel? And so, the irony of that, it's the irony of that parable is that the people who should have cared did not. It's an indictment. The story is as much as it is a celebration of the Samaritan, it's such an extreme story. This is a person who had no obligation to care about the injured man, but did. Whereas the people who passed by the man did have some obligation to that man and did not care. It's an indictment on those who passed by as much as it is a celebration of the man who gave generously and unrealistically, actually. Like normal people don't get a hotel room and say, and whatever the tab is, I'll pay it. Like that's that's like an exorbitant, extravagant kind of love that you definitely wouldn't expect from someone who has no obligation to you. Like that's the point of the story is largely it's an indictment on the people who passed by. And I'm suggesting that a lot of our churches are the people who pass by, the person who's right in your neighborhood, who's struggling. And I think to finally segue to number 2 here, I think that one of the reasons why we do it is we fundamentally misunderstand the needs of our community. Mm-hmm.
So we only think about outreach through the lens of things like a soup kitchen or a food pantry or a clothes closet. And if it doesn't fit into one of those neat buckets of like outreach thing, we're like, I don't know how to help you.
Yeah.
And so if you live in a community that's relatively affluent, you think, well, we don't really need a soup kitchen because that's not really the biggest need in my neighborhood. Well, what are the needs in your neighborhood? And so maybe let's dwell there. So step one is you got to shift your mindset. Like, I have to start caring about the people who are closest to us, not at the exclusion of global missions, not at the exclusion of, but starting with the people who are closest to me. And then number two, if I'm going to do that, then I need to understand them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's so much more opportunity than we believe there might be nearby. And no matter what your church context is, urban, suburban, even rural, everybody has problems. I mean, who do you know that has no problems? And your knee-jerk reaction might be the person that you think maybe has the most money. Like, they got it all together. They got the house, they got the boat, the cars, the kids are in private school. I guarantee you, not everything is well in that house because they're human and they still have needs. I've described this before as needing to reach the needy and the proud. And what I mean by that is the needy are the obvious ones, the people that outwardly were like, wow, they've really got a lot of problems. But the proud are the people, that on social media, it looks like everything is great. And they may not ever ask for help, and they might try to hide the fact that they even need help. But down deep, they do need help. We all do. And, or just the regular old middle-class family across the street from your church or across the street from where you live might be barely holding it together, Did one or both lose a job? Is there a chronic illness? I mean, there's any number of things that could be happening, and everybody is as deserving of the love of Christ as anybody else, and of having a relationship, that could be of help to them. I think finding out what those needs are. Now, how are you going to do that? It's harder for some, right? Because the people with obvious outward needs, it's like they can't even hide it. We know that's a big problem for them. The people that are hiding the need, whether because they don't maybe, in pride, they don't want to expose that, or they don't think anybody cares. Those are harder. But how do you do that with a relationship? And that has to start with, a handshake and a conversation, an introduction. And so to pass by those that we perceive would have no need or interest, to go to the ones that have the obvious need. I'm not saying it's wrong to go to the ones with the obvious need. I'm just saying there's a big opportunity that we're probably not spending a little bit of time trying to crack into, to find out what's really going on in people's lives.
Yeah, totally. I think, again, once we break free from just the assumption that that outreach means, and then fill in the blank with whatever your preconceived notion is. Once you break free from that and you start to open yourself up to the idea, okay, well, there might be a different way for us to do outreach. I'm just not sure what those specific needs are in my community. Once you've made that mindset shift, then you can just start exploring things, and you need to do the work. You have to do the research of figuring out what that is. So talk to people, pull a demographics survey, like what's the divorce rate in your area. You can pull psychographic studies. There's all kinds of information that you can find, at the macro level, and then talk to people, talk to school counselors. Talk to community leaders, go on walks around the neighborhoods, and, strike up conversations with people as appropriate. Don't weird people out, but, as appropriate, have conversations. At one point, we maybe even still have some of these, AJ. We had stickers that you could put on your laptop. That, what do they say? Like, I'm a pastor.
It said, I'm a pastor, need prayer, pull up a chair. Yeah.
Yeah.
Put it on the back of your laptop at the coffee shop. Yeah.
Yeah. Go to the coffee shop, not near where you live, but the one that's closest to the church, and see who, just put that sticker on your laptop. See who comes up to you, see who chats with you, and, find out what's going on in their lives and hear their stories. But there are other resources out there that can help you with this. So that can help you meet these kinds of needs. Financial Peace University is a common one to help people with, financial hangups. Divorce care is a resource out there. Grief share,
Reengage, marriage.
Reengage for marriage stuff. The Alpha program for people who are exploring faith, but they're filled with doubt, or they're an atheist or agnostic, but they're open to exploring faith. There's all kinds of great resources out there. You don't have to build something from scratch yourself, but just start thinking: what are the hurts and the hang-ups of the people in my particular community, and what am I doing to address and meet those needs? And which leads then to the third step, which is you can have whatever program or whatever event, but it doesn't matter if people don't know about it. You have some way of connecting people to that. So the first step was we need to shift our mindset from thinking about us to thinking about them. Second step is we need to really understand the needs of our community. The third step then is we need to establish sustainable outreach practices. So a one and done event isn't going to get it done. We really need to embed an outreach strategy into the DNA of our church. We talk about this as in your discipleship pathway, you need a distinct outreach step. That is characterized by a primary ministry and maybe some secondary ministries. And a primary ministry is a way in which you expect everyone in your church to engage in outreach. That can function as a bucket of things or a category of things. There could be like one label on it, so to speak, with multiple opportunities underneath that. But there needs to be some way in which we are expecting people to connect with that outreach strategy, and we hold people accountable to that. So it's not just 2 or 3 people or a handful of people who are engaged in outreach, but it's an expectation for our whole church.
Yeah, I think this is an area that needs some just really good thought and prayer and strategy, in the leadership of the church. Some churches also, they just kind of leave this open where like just everybody go out and just find something, do whatever you want. And that can be a little difficult to manage. And it's really hard then for, the people that just that's maybe not how they think, their personality. It's better to have something that you can go, here's something really specific you can engage in, and have it be limited. I mean, you want the greatest impact for the resources that you're going to be putting into it. And then, be able to communicate it well, train people to participate in it, and, have some continuing education in it as well, supporting people that they can remain confident in that area that they're serving in. All these are important aspects of it. And it's not just something you just throw together overnight. It definitely requires some thought and some strategy and some leadership. It requires people to lead the work, to be able to, have a point of contact for people to engage with, find out more about it, how they can serve, the areas in which they can serve. There's all kinds of details that go into this, between scheduling people and what are we doing? Where is it? How long is it? All these things. But yeah, developing something that can be sustainable long-term and that is clear enough in your church so that people know they can't hide from it. Are you're either in this, or you're participating in this level or step of our pathway, or you're not. But there would not be any ambiguity to it. And I think that's an important aspect. Because, the more hands that are working in the ministry, the greater effectiveness you're going to have, the greater results you're going to have. So, yeah, these are all important parts of it, but it has to be intentional for sure. Totally.
It's just not going to happen on accident. And I think that we don't want people to feel uncomfortable. We feel this tension of like, I don't know. I don't want to ask our people to step out and do this thing or whatever. And we're not serving them well when we do that. Jesus makes it pretty clear that following him requires everything. And so it's okay to make our people feel a little bit uncomfortable and say, hey, we expect you to be sharing your faith. Now we can grease those wheels. We can provide training for them, maybe a framework. One of the churches that I worked with last year introduced me to a framework called Good God Gospel. And I really, I've shared that with several churches, and they really liked that framework. They came across it. I can't remember. You can look it up. I think it's goodgodgospel.com. And there's some free resources there helping people. They have had a lot of success with that framework, helping their people understand not every conversation I have has to be a turn or burn conversation. It can start with a good conversation. Can I just build rapport with someone? And I don't have to have an ulterior motive. Like, I can just have a genuinely good conversation and that be enough, and you have enough good conversations. It leads to a God conversation where you can talk about how, what the Lord is doing in your own life, just sharing your own story and, or your perspective on things and what God is doing in the world, which can lead to a gospel conversation. And being equipped to have each of those kinds of conversations. Certain personality types are like, I don't want to go to a training, but others are like, no, I would love to go to a training that gives me a framework. So you can grease the wheels for them, but to say, hey, this is not something that we expect of everybody, is to leave them an incomplete disciple. And that's not good. We need to disciple people fully, and that includes empowering them to share their faith.
Yeah. Help people get over, maybe some levels of discomfort that they have. We all have room to grow. It doesn't mean everybody becomes a street corner evangelist. That's not how God designed us. And
hopefully
I think,
not, because that's probably not the most effective form of evangelism anyway.
But that's what people think a lot of times. Even you use the word evangelism, and they're like, "Ooh, I don't know. That sounds scary and cringe." And so that's why it takes clear communication. I've told this story to various churches and stuff, but I just always think about this flight that I was on a mission trip with, and one of my pastors leaving London on our way to Nairobi, which was our next layover. And, one of my pastors having a conversation with a guy on a plane, and I'm just kind of leaning overhearing, the gospel's being presented and answering questions and overcoming objections. And in the end, I'm thinking we're about to have a salvation right here, over Southern Europe. But no, that's not how it ended. The guy was like, okay, that's good information. I'm going to consider that. It wasn't ready. It wasn't the right time. And I always just think back, I thought if anybody was going to hear the gospel from this guy, they were 100%, they're about to become a believer. And that's not the case. So, when the greatest of those in that skill and gifting, don't close the deal, there's hope for all of us, that we can
all not close.
We can all fail at it. That's okay. The point is to try. So, so that's an example that I hold on to of encouraging failure. We all have got a role to play. It doesn't always look like that. But I think this is an important thing because it's a scary thing. It's uncomfortable for at least Western American believers. This is not built into our DNA in most churches to be discipled into. This is how we think and how we view the world and how we go about our day. And it's a very slow movement to work. So
we live in a you do you society, so we don't want to in any way put upon someone our perspective or our faith, and we really have to shift that mindset too and go, if you know a person walking in a lie, it's wouldn't it be good for them to know the truth? I don't know. That's always been my perspective. It's like you think about parenting, there are times where it's okay to let your kids believe in something or think something that's not quite true. It might even be a little bit cute. But then it kind of gets to a point where you're like, oh no, if I let this go on, they're going to grow up thinking this thing that isn't true. Here's a small example, a dumb one. And it was a lie of omission, not one of commission on the part of my parents. But I was a full grown. I'm embarrassed to say how old I was, but I was probably 18 years old before I understood that. AJ, what do you call the things what's a topping for salad? It's a little crunchy.
Croutons?
You got it.
Okay.
I was under the impression that was called dead bread.
What?
Yeah. Because my dad doesn't like croutons, and so he called it dead bread. And I made it all the way to 18 years old before I realized that's not the real name. Like, those are called croutons. And I also didn't know that no one else, not only, like, that's not just an alternative name, croutons.
No one's ever heard of it.
No one has ever heard of dead bread. Right? So, yeah, would have been good for, that wasn't my parent. My dad, I've told my parents this and they laugh about it, because they didn't intentionally not teach me the word crouton. It's just that my dad always called it dead bread. So that's just how I learned it.
Wow. That's pretty good. Yeah, I had not heard that story before, Scott.
I'm always good for a story. The point is, there are people around you who, that's a small, silly thing. But their lives are filled with lies. Lies about who they are, lies about why they are the way they are, lies about what will fix their problems and make them feel good. And they are just as silly as dead bread. And you know the truth. How loving and kind is it, looping back to kind of the Good Samaritan? How loving and kind is it to ignore a person who is spiritually dying on the side of the road when you have the truth? And when we can understand that, we don't beat people up with the truth then as a consequence of that. But we do need to come alongside people lovingly with the truth and be prepared to just share that truth. And most of our people are not thinking about life that way. They're thinking, I don't want to impose. Impose. You have an obligation to the people who are spiritually dead.
Yeah. Transformation from dead bread to disciple making crouton.
To crouton, yeah. That feels like a good place to maybe just do a quick recap, AJ.
So we're moving from that inward focus to that outward focus. This is how God designed the church to grow. This, right? I mean, if we're going to take the gospel to the ends of the earth, it's got to start with across the street. But we've got to shift from an us to them mindset in the church, because we are very comfortable in many of our congregations, not doing anything different. We've got to understand who is outside. Who do we not know? What are their needs? And then actually develop a strategy. How are we going to engage our people to engage the world and move this ball forward with people coming to know Christ? So there you go. 3 very difficult and simple steps. But we would love to help you put that together.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to just share one encouraging story to wrap as we close. I've been working with a church that in the last year or so that has declined quite a bit over the previous decade. And they made some internal changes, like they fixed some things on the inside, like spruced some things up and did some signage changes, and initially were discouraged that things weren't just like magically turning around. And we were having one of our implementation coaching meetings, and as they were explaining to me all the things they'd done, I said, the thing you've not yet done is you got to go out. Like, you got to get with the people. And, it was not just a couple months after that they really leaned into that, started just simple things, going to festivals where you're just being present, being visible, getting to know people. And in the subsequent months, they have grown. They've grown something like 40% in the last 4 or 5 months or so. And so this is the key to revitalization. The other stuff is good. It's also important. Because when they show up, there needs to be a healthy church there for them to grow and be discipled in. But you won't turn around unless you actually focus on outreach.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, before we go, one quick plug, because we're horrible salespeople, but we do have to mention the Healthy Churches Toolkit. So if you'll go to healthychurchestoolkit.com, you can register there for a free 7-day trial and have access to every feature in the toolkit. Get in there and explore it. This is coming out around the 1st of March or so. Easter is right around the corner, and we've got an amazing Easter resource hub in there that you would want to take advantage of. So check that out.
Speaking of outreach, there's invite cards in there. There's guest follow-up email sequence generator. There's stuff in there that you can use right away to help you be successful in an Easter outreach strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. Go to healthychurchestoolkit.com and check that out. Otherwise, this has been episode 280 of the Church Revitalization Podcast, and today's show notes are at malfersgroup.com/280, where you can check out this week's article and some resources in there. Maybe, Scott, I'll even throw the link in there to get those stickers. We got a few of those stickers left for the laptops.
Really?
Prayer stickers. So, yeah, little bonus.
Do you have one? Do you have one there?
No, I looked while we were talking. It's out of reach.
Okay.
But yeah,
right.
I'll put that in the article this week. You can see that.
Okay.
Thanks everybody for being with us. We'll see you again next time.